Thank you. Okay, so in the spirit of the reason you're all here to hear me waffle on, who wants to tell me why I can't turn my laptop on?
Did you try turning it on after the off and on again?
Yeah, that's how I know I can't turn it on.
Oh, okay. Well, all again.
Charge it.
Come on, I can't turn it on. Why not?
Charge it.
Battery not attached?
Charged it. Well done. Can you see that from there?
No.
The man wins a prize.
Sweet. I never win anything.
Now, would you like some Bluetooth speakers or a Chromecast?
Bluetooth speakers would be lovely.
Round of applause for this man, please. And here's the proof.
Was a lucky guess, by the way. Why did you keep your battery set?
Pardon?
Secure their trap.
This room's intimate enough that I don't need this, right?
Yeah, you can. You have a big enough voice.
Yeah, big enough mouth. Alright, so let's let this come up a sec. So while I'm waiting for this to boot, as Jeremy said, my name's Alex Boag-Munroe. Some of you may know me as Nimpo from IRC, others may know me as Hacker from XDA. I'm a systems administrator, have been for about 13 years. Got into IT and computers at the ripe young age of 14. And start this. Come on. Yeah, that's fine. There we go. So some contact details there, how I'm normally known online, and we're here to hopefully get better at solving problems, because there tends to be a bit of a gap between the development point and the end user. Because normally in the corporate world you've got developers that do all the development. How many developers have we got in the room? Raise your hands. Okay. So you and people like you are why there needs to be a troubleshooting step. Because, let's face it, users aren't developers. And so they don't fully understand your product, probably don't fully understand the thing that your product's running on. So yeah, we're here for the diagnostics today, and to try and bridge that gap between the very, very technical and the person who ultimately you're hoping is using what it is you've created. Now, the online development community, especially like XDA, is kind of unique because there's no sort of support level between the developer and the end user. Sorry about that. So there's no, you don't have a support desk, you don't have somebody in the middle to sort of buffer you and protect you. Like most developers, like Microsoft developers, don't speak to Microsoft users. But you guys do. So it's important to understand them and speak their language instead of yours when it comes to figuring out what's gone wrong. So, apologies, I did not get a chance to rehearse, so this might be a little bit staggered. Come on. So typically, someone comes into your thread with your product, it doesn't work, I've got a problem. The more users you've got, you introduce an entropy. Entropy means you've got more and more use cases, and different use cases means you've got problems. And typically, this is usually the number one cause of problem. Who can tell me what PEBCAT means?
Problem exists between keyboard and chair.
Well done. Problem exists between keyboard and chair. Now that's normally a derogatory term reserved for the user. But in this case, you developers sit in a chair as well. So,
I prefer error 18.
what's error 18?
There was 18 inches away from the screen.
I like that. So, it's important when you're troubleshooting, you need to get right back to basics, because one of the things you cannot do is assume a certain level of knowledge with your user. It's better to ask too many questions than not enough. And if you're not dealing with a written form, so if you forget for a moment that you're on XDA in a forum where it's all text and on the screen, one of the most important tools when someone's troubleshooting is a piece of paper and a pen. So when you're asking your questions, write down the answers, because it actually forces that information through the more creative aspects of your brain. You're going to remember stuff, and when you see it sort of laid out on the paper, you'll start to make connections very, very quickly that you may not make even just through reading a forum post or thinking about it if you're just listening, because you concentrate on what they're saying rather than processing what they're telling you. Another important thing to think about, to go back to the language of the user, is what do they actually mean when they report a problem to you? So if I'm using your app or your ROM or what have you, and I come to you and say, it won't switch on. What do I actually mean by it won't switch on? Anybody? Yeah.
Can mean anything.
Exactly. It could be from a state of it doesn't actually go through the process of powering on, or it could be someone's in a boot loop because they think on is pressing a button and then a few seconds later, here it is, I can use it. So it's important to drill into, you've really got to pull specifics out of your users before you can even start to solve that problem. It could mean there's a strange graphic, someone has lifted someone's phone and gone, I'm going to be really helpful and flash a new ROM on there, and it's now going into the bootloader, the recovery menu for whatever reason, and all they've said is it won't turn on. So you need to start asking questions. So, as far as I'm concerned, there are 4 pillars of good troubleshooting. See? 4. Communication. So unless you've got the thing that's broken right here in your hands for you to look at and for you to start playing with, troubleshooting, doing your diagnostics, finding out what's wrong with it means speaking to somebody, whether it's through a forum post, through an email, on a telephone call, wherever you're going to be speaking to them. And it's vital when you're doing that that you're clear, concise, and try and speak as plain an English as possible. Questions, try and keep them closed rather than open. Does everyone know the difference between an open and a closed question? Anybody not? Okay. So step them through and be clear. So there's a difference between turn it on and press and hold the power button for 2 seconds to switch the phone on. So you're being clear. And then followed by, does it do anything at all after you do that? Watch the screen while you're doing it. Does anything happen? Because then we can establish it's a dead device, they haven't charged it, or what have you. Because I have seen a case where someone's forgotten to charge their phone and it's died without them knowing, and then they've gone, oh shit, my phone's dead. So there's much less margin for error with those 2 questions than saying, what happens when you try and turn it on? Because again, you're then asking them to interpret the information that you want to find out. The goal is when you're providing support for your users, there can only really be 2 possible answers to the question that you're asking them. Either the information that you actually want, or I don't know. In which case, time for a new question. And then really dig into your diagnostics. So you're asking the questions. If it's not coming back in written form, you're writing down the answers. Has anything changed? Have you installed anything recently? Have you decided to overclock it, or is somebody overclocking your device, or laptop, or phone, or tablet? Applies to anything like that? Have you been stood around any really powerful magnets? People are very, very bad at offering information about things that they don't know anything about. So if Abhishek is trying to help me through an issue with cyanogen mod, I can probably give him a good amount of diagnostic information to work with before he starts asking me questions. Someone who knows absolutely nothing about it at all, you're back at, it won't do anything, which it's not useful. And because they need your help, chances are they're obviously lacking the knowledge that you've got to solve their problem. So, more examples of good questions. Is installing, so from a developer point of view, is installing my software the only thing you've changed? Are you running any custom kernels? Back again, are you currently overclocking, or have you overclocked before? Have you dropped it recently? Any other problems, any stability problems? Like before you've decided to come to me and say it's dead, has there been any stability issues leading up to that point? Because then you could go, well, okay, there could be a hardware issue here. The memory could have a problem, the CPU could have a problem, the battery could have been on its way out, whatever. Now here's the real kicker. If you've asked all those questions about have you changed anything, have you done anything like that, there's still a good chance that the answer you get to all of those is no, but they should have said yes. Don't just stop at questions. Questions are a way of encouraging the information that you want out of your user base, but it's not the be-all and end-all. Don't rely 100% on the information that you get back from your user. If information is volunteered, brilliant. It might be a bit easier, but that initial opening of the communication is just getting you started. And on that point, you also need knowledge. So for number one to work, for your communication layer to work, you need to know what you're talking about, how to clearly describe things, not only know your product, but you then get into the arena of needing to know at least something about what your product's going to be running on. Especially if you've written a generic app. If we move away from just building ROMs, because there's a lot of implied knowledge with building a ROM for a phone or a tablet. If you're in the app layer, that's going back to the original point with the entropy and use cases and everything else gets that much bigger. And unfortunately, to be good at solving problems with your product, you need to have some level of knowledge about where your product's going to be used and who's going to be using it. One hopes, in the case of releasing core level things like kernels and ROMs, that you know things like how long it should take to boot, how it behaves when it's booting, should it show a graphic or should it just look dead until it appears, all those kind of things. Small things, but things that help you figure out what's going on, the expected process, and it makes it easier for you to step your user through the steps that you want them to go through to try and solve the problem that they're having. Other things like how long should it take to power up? What are the key combinations to get into recovery if you need to? Because chances are they're not going to know. So if you're speaking to them to try and ascertain what the problem is, or you think you know what the problem is and you then need to take them through the steps of fixing it, like wiping the Dalvik cache or we're going to try and reflash, don't take it for granted that the person you're speaking to is the person that installed your product. Someone else could have done it for them. And now they're contacting you because whoever did it doesn't have time, or they're lazy, or they don't exist anymore, whatever. And so they've come to you for help. But the flip side of knowledge is, if you don't know, say so. Don't bullshit. As a user, and I can tell you now, users would much rather you say, I don't know, let me go and find out, than you start pulling reasons out of your ass for why things aren't working well. And don't be afraid to ask other people for help. You know, we are ultimately a community of knowledgeable people. If you're working on something and you're not sure, ask somebody. to build that second pillar, the knowledge pillar. I can't find my mouse cursor. There it is. So, yeah. Problems are much harder to solve when you're guessing. Now, for anyone in the room who knows me is going to find pillar number 3 relatively amusing. Because pillar number 3, when you're helping your users, patience. A few people in the room know me. So you can be the best in the world at 1 and 2. But if you're dealing with a really difficult to deal with user, they could be difficult for a number of reasons. They could be uncooperative. They could be lacking a lot of the basic knowledge needed to follow your instructions. Even as far down as they just got that lucky that they managed to do something with their phone and day-to-day life is a struggle. Patience is key. Once it's established, 1 and 2 establishes that there is actually a problem for you to deal with. Once you've established that and you know there's a problem to deal with, you're going to need buckets of this. Helps when you're being paid. Because you go, at least I'm being paid for my time on this. But there is a lot of reward, joking aside and how acerbic I can be aside, there is a lot of reward with having patience and helping someone through a problem that you may have caused them. Because nobody's perfect, no developers are perfect, there's no perfect code out there unless it's just a hello world script. So yeah, there's going to be lots and lots of that while you're employing pillars 1 and 2 to try and get the problem resolved. And the 4th pillar, I should have got a hand thing, shouldn't I? There we go. So the 4th pillar, and this sort of wraps up the other 3, you need confidence. Yeah? In what you do, in your knowledge, the way you come across. You basically want to sound like your face is permanently like that. Yeah, a good, confident, approaching smug level. I'm that fucking good at what I do. Because the person you're speaking to needs to believe that. Because they have to trust you. Because you're essentially piloting these people through their problem on their device. You're controlling their device, their computer, their phone, their tablet, whatever. You're controlling it through them. And they have to trust that what you're telling them is correct to do it and listen. You're a people pilot when you're solving problems. Use your imagination. Because like I've said down here, people don't come in boxes, so don't think inside one. Yeah? And keep thinking, keep engaging your brain. Because you could be so clever and so good at what you do that you can mentally communicate with your phone as if you had a Bluetooth chip in your head. But no one's going to trust that if you come across as sort of a, I can't string sentences together, I look at the ground when I'm talking, or I shuffle my feet, or I mumble, or I'm going, I'm not sure. They need that confidence in you, and the only way they're going to get that is from you. If you sound like an authority on what you're talking about, people are going to be that much more accurate when you're giving them instructions, clear, concise instructions, as to how to figure out what's causing the problem that you're trying to help them solve. Yeah, things don't suck at putting sentences on a screen. Yeah, because if someone can't clearly understand what you've written to them in a forum post or in an email, you're already introducing potential confusion in the step that you've asked them to perform. So we go back to the communication, be clear, be concise, and be as closed as possible. It's better to give them 12 short instructions than a massive describing paragraph all in one thing for them to try and follow. I appear to be at the end of my talk. Any questions? Yes.
How does it scale? Because that effort, asking that many questions, walking that particular user just took, what, half hour, 20 minutes, maybe if they had a base knowledge.
Maybe.
You do it when your user base is thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions.
Well, that's where we hope that you developers put things in like documentation. So,
But you can't document bugs.
pardon?
You can't document a bug.
No, but you can document use cases. These may not be bugs. This could just be how do I do thing with your app. But no, you're right, you can't document a bug, but how else are you going to find out what's going on? You either don't care or you do care, in which case to get to the answer, you need to be that, because you'll waste a hell of a lot more time if you don't go through the clearer stages and you either waffle at them or you wait for them to waffle at you and you try and lift out information. Because you could get to like question number 2 and go, and that's what, 2 minutes, 3 minutes? For your real deep problems. One would hope for a real deep problem, once you've solved it, you solve it once, and it's solved for everybody.
Can I maybe add on to that? You mentioned you've solved that problem. A big and important piece, you mentioned use cases, is to document that answer and document the result and what was the fix. Helps not only as you're putting together a new version, but also within a new use case of saying, okay, if you do this, here's what the expected result is, here's how we're going to fix it, and you can, that's communication. It just comes back to communicating that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you could even argue that the first pillar, as I called it, is more of the foundation that the rest of them stand on. Because if you can't get information to and fro between the two, you're just not going to solve whatever problem they're having. And then act on, like Jeremy just mentioned there, so act on the solution. So it might be a bug fix that you roll out. Make sure you communicate out the fact that there's a new release, these are the bugs we've fixed. It could be a case that you need a FAQ, frequently asked questions, for repetitive questions. Okay, your top 5, top 10, top 50, whatever, depending on how big your product is or your project, and have them somewhere that's easy for people to find. And don't be afraid to refer people to, if it sounds like that they've just gone, how do I run Notepad, or have you? Don't be afraid to try and refer them to documentation or easy how-to guides. But also, again, communication, make sure they're there and they're well written and they're easy to follow. Because there's no point having like a technical white paper on what you've done and expecting users to follow that as to how to use your thing.
We had that in Ubuntu. We had like loads of different ways in which people could get support, including mailing lists, which are hard for new, inexperienced, non-technical people to work with. IRC, which is logged, but not a very good way to go back and view, how to solve the problem. Once you solved it once, you solve it again the next day when someone else comes along. And with forums, we found they got out of date really quickly. So someone would post, here's how to get Broadcom Wi-Fi working, and then 300 pages of text after that with, but this doesn't work and that does work and this, and then, and if you wanted the solution, the first page was useless. You needed page 48, where the real answer is. So we encourage people to move to Stack Exchange, where we could rate up and down answers and moderate out the crap. And get rid of the answers that just weren't useful, and moderate up the answers that are useful. So we've got askubuntu.com, which is a Stack Exchange implementation. And that is now bubbled up to the top of Google when you search for, how do I get my Broadcom working on Ubuntu? That appears at the top of Google, rather than some forum post from a distant past that's never been maintained and is useless shit that we should get rid of.
Yeah, so that right there is a really, really good example of communication and knowledge being shown as, good foundations for good troubleshooting and good problem solving. Any other questions? Yeah.
As a volunteer, how do you avoid burning out on users asking very basic questions?
So that would be patience.
What's your response?
Yeah, specifically you.
So me, well, I haven't in the past. When it comes to volunteer programs, it's you've got the trade-off between, is my time worth this amount of effort? Sometimes it is, in which case you stick at it, and you know, I admire the people who do have that drive and passion and the buckets of that patience that I was talking about to still be able to continue on through. Not everybody does. I certainly struggle with it sometimes, and often. But other people are super helpful, super great, and they are the people that are really good at providing support for people who do struggle. So yeah, it's finding that trade-off, or at least find the thing about what you're working on that's driving you and motivating you to not mind the fact that you're just getting so many like simpleton questions come through. But simpleton type questions, again, we go back to what the gentleman from Ubuntu was saying. Am I getting a lot of repetitive, really easy questions? Build a FAQ. Are some of the things that need to happen with this thing? Make a wiki. Yeah.
When dealing with communities,
yeah.
Do you think that there are lost cases in some percent of the users? I mean, for sure there can be approach that can be taken against most resilient users that just can't get your support because they don't understand any approach you take. Do you think that it's just better consider it as a lost case, or just or try to find another approach until it works?
No, I actually do. I mean, I cut my teeth originally in a support background. My first proper full-time IT job was on telephone support. For people, and this was 1998, 1999. People buying PCs and not really knowing what to do with them. You know, 95 and it's in relative infancy. And unfortunately, yes, there are people who will bite off more than they can chew. Anyone familiar with my projects on XDA? That's why you asked the question, wasn't it? So rightly or wrongly, my approach, I had a post 5, which was basically a hall of shame for the lost causes that you're speaking of. You know, the type of people, how did you even manage to figure out how to click a mouse to get here, let alone flash a kernel to your phone? And if you ask, and don't be afraid to point out to people if you're struggling with the basics of things, depending on what your project is. I mean, for an app, fair enough. There's a lot of, you have to be respective and sort of try and make things as easy as possible for your users. But for the projects that are getting like really low level, where you're flashing ROMs and changing kernels and experiment with overclocking, it's important that you let the people that could potentially be using your product, for want of a better word, that there should be a level of implied knowledge before they're going ahead with what they're doing. Because let's face it, flashing kernels can be dangerous. Overclocking is definitely dangerous, especially if people don't know how to overclock. I mean, I had people flash my kernels and go, my phone's crashing when I clock it to 1.6 gigahertz, when its stock speed was 1.2. Well, of course it is. So, yeah, does that answer your question? Anyone else? No? Okay. Yeah.
Are there any projects that you're involved with at the minute?
At the moment, no. Simply because I actually work for a company called Dupix. We're a software company for property management for estate agents. And that job is keeping me very busy. I look after 24 servers, and we're in the process of doing lots of improvements to the architecture, and yeah, I'm a very busy guy. But I am hoping to get to the stage where I can come back and maybe pick up another project. I've just got a new LG G3, which could entice me back in, depending on what pops up for it. So, yeah.
What problem that you've solved are you most proud of?
That's a very good question. I'll have to think about that. Can I come back to you on that?
Sure.
Yep, Jeremy's just come up with it. So, going back a few years, who remembers the HTC Hero?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, good stuff. Did anyone have a HTC Hero?
I have one here.
Alan's still got it.
Did anyone have a HTC Hero and run Freud Villain on it? Just the one. I think that deserves a prize. Have a Chromecast. So Freud Villain was based on Froyo, which was the Android 2.2 release, and HTC had done their typical, yeah, you get 2.1 and nothing else because we've got bigger and better things to be selling to people. And so working with groups like CyanogenMod and developers that I knew from CyanogenMod and Nathan Russell, the founder of VillainROM, and if anybody knows him, Pulsar. And a lot of the guys that used to hang around in the VillainROM channel, Freud Villain was, because VillainROM was the first ROM that I flashed, because I had a HTC Hero and had it for a couple of days, flashed VillainROM to it. And the rest is history. It's how I got involved in all of this. And yeah, my favourite project that I've worked on is probably Freud Villain, because it was the first time that I really could delve in to AOSP, changed how it compiled, a lot of optimizations that just weren't applied to that particular build for the Hero. Some of my improvements even made it into the CyanogenMod tree. So yeah, that was a really good and really productive time, and was a very, very good testament to open source and collaborative development.
Was that the case you had to backport Bionic from RM7 to 6?
I didn't do that, someone else did.
Oh, I see.
It was, fortunately for me, it was already done when we got there. Any other questions? No? Okay, well thank you for your time and coming and listening to me speak.